All right, today we're going to dive into a pretty heavy topic, an idea from postcolonial theory that's both really influential and, honestly, pretty controversial. We're talking about the idea that violence can, in some cases, actually be a necessary force for creating justice. It's a radical thought, so let's just get straight into it.
So let's just put the central question right out there on the table. Can violence, something we're all taught to see as purely destructive, ever be a force for good? It's a tough question, right? It goes against a lot of what we believe, but it's the exact question we're going to explore today.
The specific concept we're digging into here is called constructive violence. And look, this isn't about random chaos or senseless aggression, not at all. It's a very specific term. It means violence that's used with a clear purpose, to protest and tear down an unjust, oppressive system. The whole point is to clear the slate, to build something new and better from the ashes.
So, where did this whole idea come from? Well, to really get it, we've got to start with the thinker who really gave it shape in the modern era, Fanon. And his work is the foundation for seeing violence as not just a political act, but as something deeply psychological too.
And Fanon, well, he did not mince words. He famously wrote, "Decolonization is always a violent phenomenon." For him, there was zero ambiguity. If a system was built with violence and is maintained by violence, his argument is you can't just ask it nicely to go away. It has to be dismantled with the same kind of force that created it.
Now here's the really crucial part. Fanon saw violence as doing several things at once. Yes, it's a direct answer to the violence of the state, but it's more. He argued it could actually unify a people that had been broken apart. And then there's this really intense personal element. He called it a cleansing force. The idea is that for an individual who has been oppressed and made to feel inferior for so long, the very act of fighting back is a way to reclaim their humanity and shake off that feeling of powerlessness.
Okay, so that's the theory. But what does this actually look like in the real world? Well, to see it in action, we're going to turn to Kenya, because its long, hard path to independence became a real-life example of exactly the kind of struggle Fanon was describing.
This timeline gives us a quick but really powerful snapshot. The whole thing really kicks off in the late 1800s when British settlers start taking over land. By the 1950s, that tension explodes into the Mau Mau uprising, a full-blown armed rebellion against the colonial forces. And that violent fight was absolutely a key reason Kenya finally won its uhuru, or independence, in 1963. So you see, Fanon's theory wasn't just some abstract idea, this was happening.
But here's the twist. Gaining independence, it wasn't the end of the story. A new, and maybe even sneakier, form of oppression took root: neo-colonialism. The old foreign rulers were gone, but they were replaced by a new Kenyan elite who basically kept the old, exploitative system running. The fight for real freedom was far from over.
And this feeling of betrayal, this sense that the revolution was left unfinished, is exactly what the legendary Kenyan author Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o explores in his powerful novel, Petals of Blood. He basically uses a fictional story as a case study to see how Fanon's ideas about violence might apply in this new neo-colonial world.
So the novel focuses on 4 main characters in a small village, and each of them kind of represents a different piece of the broken promise of independence. You have Wanja, who's been forced into this brutal eat or be eaten mindset just to survive. There's Abdullah, a war hero from the uprising who's been totally forgotten and left with nothing. Then there's Munira, the guy who just passively watches all the corruption, paralyzed and unable to act. And finally, Karega, the young idealist who's still trying to fight for the workers. They're all victims of this new system.
And all of their separate stories, all their pain, their frustration, their sense of betrayal, it all builds and builds towards one single explosive and violent climax. An act that Ngũgĩ presents as a kind of purification for them and for their society.
Yeah, to get what happens at the end of the book, we have to remember that key distinction Ngũgĩ makes, which really echoes Fanon. There are 2 kinds of violence. On one side, you have the oppressive violence of the state, the kind that's criminal and dehumanizing because it props up a corrupt system. But then, on the other side, you have the constructive violence of the resistance, the kind that, he argues, purifies humanity by protesting that injustice. One serves the system, the other wants to destroy it.
The whole novel leads up to an arson that kills 3 corrupt local businessmen. But it's not a simple act, it's a convergence of all their stories. Wanja is finally getting back at her main oppressor, Abdullah is avenging his betrayed past, and Munira, the passive spectator, is the one who finally awakens and lights the match, burning down a brothel that's come to symbolize all the moral rot of this new Kenya. It's like their individual desperation comes together to create one collective act of purification.
So what's the ultimate point here? After the fire and the destruction,
what's left? Well, the novel doesn't give us any easy answers. It's not that simple. But what it does suggest is that this act of destruction, well, it creates the possibility for something new to grow.
The final argument being made is that this constructive violence, this arson, is what's needed to burn away the corruption. Only after this purification by fire can there be real hope, a real promise for a new, more just Kenya to be born. In this view, destruction is actually a prerequisite for rebirth.
And so we're left with this final, lingering question, the core dilemma that both Fanon and Ngũgĩ really force us to think about. If a social order is built on violence in the first place, can a truly new and better society ever be born without it? It's a challenging thought and one worth pondering.